Welcome back to the Lost Planeswalker, and we have another great commander deck tech for you today with Talion the Kindly Lord. In this deck, I'm calling 1, 2, 3, 10, you're dead. Talion the Kindly Lord is a brand new commander from the wilds of Eldraine, and he has some really cool abilities that we typically don't see in uncommanders. Funny enough, Talion the Kindly Lord is 2, a blue and a black, legendary creature, fairy noble, with flying. As Talion the Kindly Lord enters the battlefield, choose a number between 1 and 10. Whenever an opponent casts a spell with mana value, power, or toughness equal to the chosen number, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. Talion has a really unique ability because you have to choose between 1 and 10, and hopefully your opponents are going to cast enough spells that have mana value, power, or toughness equal to that number, which is kind of difficult because there's a lot of variables in Magic, and while you could choose something like 3 and you'll probably get some good value off it, how can we improve on that? I have built this deck to be able to basically get us exactly where we want, messing around with some of the mana costs, being able to make multiple copies of this commander. So let's dive right in and see how that works. Starting off, we have the land base in this deck with islands and swamps. I didn't go into super great depth here and pick out a bunch of islands and swamps because I've built those in some of my other videos and I didn't know if it would really matter too much. If whatever you have lying around is really going to be the best. You don't have too many cards here that really rely on having 13, black or blue mana pips in them. So putting a good number of tap lands in is going to work just fine. Next up, with ramp and mana ramp, we have Arcane Signet, Commander Sphere, and Dimir Cluestone. All these are going to help us get our colors, and we can sacrifice Commander Sphere and Dimir Cluestone to draw a card. Dimir Signet, Doubling Cube, and Expedition Map are next. Dimir Signet is great to help color fix. Doubling Cube later in the game is going to be able to double the amount of mana so we can cast more spells, and Expedition Map can get us whatever land we need, so I really love that. And lastly, we have Sol Ring and Sword of the Animist. Sol Ring's a no-brainer, should go in every commander deck, and Sword of the Animist is just going to help us get more of our basic lands onto the battlefield. This next section is where we start really getting into the deck with cost selection. There were a couple of cards that I could find that help, increase the mana cost over everything. I didn't want to add too much because they were symmetrical effects. So what we got here is the God Pharaoh statue, Sphere of Resistance, Thorn of the Amethyst, and Trinisphere. The God Pharaoh statue increases spells our opponents cast by 2, meaning we don't have to choose 1 or 2, meaning the lowest spell that they can cast is 3, meaning that we limit now 3 to 10. This gives us a better chance of hitting whatever they're going to be casting. In addition, they'll also lose a life at the beginning of our end step. Sphere of Resistance adds 1 mana cost to all spells in play. If you have both the God Pharaoh statue and Sphere of Resistance out, now they're limited to 4 to 10. Thorn of the Amethyst increases that a little further, with non-creature spells cost 1 more to play, meaning instant, sorceries, enchantments, artifacts, all those now cost an additional 1. And Trinisphere, I think, is really the best card for this deck, and unfortunately there aren't a lot of other effects that really work this way, but as long as Trinisphere is untapped, each spell that would cost less than 3 mana to cast costs 3 mana to cast. Now this doesn't work particularly well with our other things because that doesn't really work anymore because they're going to cost 3 or more, but that's okay. We're still limiting our numbers to choose from, meaning that we can hit 3, 4, 5, 6 more frequently, and we're going to get a lot of value from that. In addition to these cost selections, the main focus of the deck is copying your commander. So we have a huge category I call Copy This. First up, we have Artisan of Forms, Blade of Shared Souls, and Crackling Counterpart. All of these are going to be able to copy or make a token that's a copy of our commander, and that's exactly what we want. Next up is Clever Impersonator, Cytoplasm, and Dimir Doppelganger. Some more great copiers, and Dimir Doppelganger can even copy creatures from the graveyard, which could be another clone, and then that clone can become a copy of our commander. Next 3 is Faded Infiltration, Glasspool Mimic, and Irenicus's Vile Duplication. And Irenicus's Vile Duplication is a kind of really great card because it already makes it so the legend rule doesn't apply. If we don't have our other pieces out there that negate that effect, this is one way we can copy our commander for only 4 mana, which is pretty great. Now moving on to Mirror Box, Mirror Gallery, and Phantasmal Image, we get some more copiers, but we also get 2 of the 3 cards in this deck that make it so the legend rule doesn't apply. This is kind of the essential thing in this deck. We want to make sure we can copy our commander multiple times, and we're going to need either Mirror Box, Mirror Gallery, and one other card to do so. In addition, Mirror Box gives each legendary creature +1/+1, and each non-token creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with the same name as that creature. For all of the creature shapeshifters that we have in this deck, they are non-tokens, so we're going to get to buff them up a ton when it becomes a copy of Talion. Next up is Phyrexian Metamorph, Quasi-Duplicate, and Rite of Replication. Rite of Replication is actually super cool in this deck because if we can pay an extra 5 to kick it, we'll create 5 tokens instead of 1, meaning that those 5 copies can already cover half of all the numbers that we need to cover for our commander. Next 3 are Sakashima of the Thousand Faces, Sakashima the Imposter, and Sakashima's Student, some of the best copier ninjas around. Sakashima is that third card that makes it so the legend rule doesn't apply to our permanents, which is super important in this deck, and we will definitely need to get one of those 3 onto the battlefield to really make this work. Next we have Sea Double, Shapeseer, and Spark Double. Spark Double is another one of those fantastic legendary rule doesn't apply cards, but only for the token that it creates, so it's not as great, but it's really good. And lastly, we have Stolen Identity and Vesuvian Duplomancy, which are 2 of my favorite cards because, first off, Stolen Identity has an ability called Cypher, which was around in Dragon's Maze and has not been reprinted since. But whenever you cast that spell, you can attach it to a creature, and whenever that creature deals combat damage, you can cast the spell for free, which is a really neat ability, especially when we're copying our commander over and over again to make more and more copies of it. And Vesuvian Duplomancy works with Stolen Identity because whenever you cast a spell that targets only a single artifact or creature you control, create a token that's a copy of that artifact or creature, except it's not legendary. So if we don't have Mirror Box, Mirror Gallery, or Sakashima of Thousand Faces out, if we have Vesuvian Duplomancy out, and we're able to target one of our copy spells to our commander, the copy that we make from the spell will go away because it's non-legendary, but Vesuvian Duplomancy will make it so the other copy created from this trigger won't be. So we have quite a few viable options to make a ton of our commanders, be able to go the whole gauntlet and back to make it so whenever your opponent casts a spell, they're going to lose a ton of life. Now, I talked about a bunch of we need to get those cards, but how are we going to get them? Well, I've included 5 search spells in this deck to do so. We have Demonic Tutor, Fabricate, and Trophy Mage, get some of the cards we need into our hand. And we also have Vampire Tutor and Whirl of Invention to also help us get that. If you feel like you need more tutor spells in the deck, you can always add more. There's a lot of other black tutors in this deck, but I figured this was enough. You know, if you can't find them with these, or, you know, you're not drawing into any of them, maybe you increase it some, but I think that's really all you need for this deck. So this last category I'm going to go over, I call Counter Draw Reanimate, because that's basically all the rest of this deck does, is drawing you cards to help you get to the cards you need, reanimating stuff from your graveyard to bring it back, and countering spells that you don't want your opponents to play. So first off, we have Ether Spellbomb, Ether Blade Agent, and Ambition's Cost. Ether Spellbomb can be sacked to bounce a creature back to its owner's hand, whether that's your creature or not, to recopy your commander, or you can sack it to draw a card. Ether Blade Agent has Death Touch, and when he transforms, he turns into a creature with Death Touch, and whenever it deals combat damage, you draw a card. And Ambition's Cost makes you lose 3 life and draws you 3 cards. Ancient Evacuation, Ancient Silver Dragon, and Animate Dead are 3 other great cards. Ancient Evacuation draws you cards equal to the number of cards in your hand, and then you discard a card for each card drawn this way, or you can cycle it for basic land. Ancient Silver Dragon is an awesome card from Battle of Baldur's Gate that draws you cards equal to a number you roll on a d20 after it deals combat damage. So it can draw you 1, or it can draw you 20. In addition, it gives you no max hand size for the rest of the game, which would probably also be a pretty cool card to copy and have multiple of on the battlefield. Animate Dead is an all-star because we can animate anything back from a graveyard, ours or our opponents. So maybe we want to start copying something great our opponents have, or bring back one of our copy things to copy our commander again. Lots of options to choose from. Next up is Archmage Ascension, Archmage Emeritus, and Ashiok Wicked Manipulator. Archmage Ascension is another great search card. Once we get enough counters on it, whenever we would draw a card, we just search our library for a card instead, meaning that in the late game, we can just be searching for a clone spell or a counter spell or whatever we need every time our opponents cast a spell of a mana value. Archmage Emeritus is also going to draw us cards whenever we cast those instant sorcery spells to either copy our commander or counter other stuff. And Ashiok the Wicked Manipulator is a super great card that cares about exiling. It doesn't particularly fit in this deck, but it is another brand new card, so I'll read it off for you. If you would pay life while your library has at least that many cards in it, exile that many cards from the top of your library instead. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, exile one of them, and put the other one into your hand. -2, create 2 1/1 black nightmare creature tokens with at the beginning combat on your turn. If this card is put into exile this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And -7, target player exiles the top X cards of their library, where X is the total mana value of cards you own in exile. This is a pretty cool commander. This is a pretty cool planeswalker, and I'm sure that there's going to be a really cool way to build around it, but it was a new card, so I thought it'd be fun to add into this set. Next up is Baleful Strix, Biden of Thassa, and Blue Sun Zenith. Baleful Strix is just a great flying death touch creature that when it enters, you draw a card. This is really interesting because, you know, it's a good early blocker early on. People aren't going to want to swing into you, so it's going to help protect you for a couple of turns until you can get your commander out. Biden of Thassa is great because whenever a creature you control deals damage, you draw a card. I love that effect. And you can force creatures your opponents control to attack this turn if able, which might not work the best for you because our commander isn't particularly the biggest, but that's okay. And Blue Sun Zenith can draw you X number of cards, and then you shuffle it into its library, so maybe later in the game when you need some other stuff, you can just play this, draw a bunch of cards, and carry on. Our next three are Blur, Braids, Arisen Nightmare, and Counterspell. Blur was kind of put in there because we can exile a creature we control and then return it, whether that's a copy or a commander. Maybe you want to choose a new number because whenever it enters, you choose a number. So that's a cool way. In addition, it'll give us a little card draw. Braids Arisen Nightmare lets us sack artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. And if we do, our opponents either have to sack a permanent of that type. And if they can't, they lose 2 life and we draw a card. This is just a really cool card, and we can basically choose whatever we're not caring about. And if our opponents want to sack it, they can. And if not, then we get to draw cards. So that works pretty great for us. And Counterspell, counter target spell, pretty self-explanatory and very powerful. Next up, we have Cruel Somnophage, Dance of the Dead, and Dimir Charm. Cruel Somnophage has 2 abilities. 1, we can make our opponents mill 4 cards, and number 2, when we cast him as a creature, his power and toughness are equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards, which is pretty great for us. Dance of the Dead is another reanimate spell, except you have to pay 1 and a black to untap that creature, which isn't too bad. And Dimir Charm is just a great way to counter target sorcery, destroy target creature with power 2 or less, or look at the top 3 cards of target player's library and then put 1 back and the rest into that player's graveyard. If our opponents have any top deck manipulation or small creatures, we can basically just get rid of it real nice and easy. Next up, we have Jin-Gitaxi's Progress Tyrant, Reanimate, and Rhystic Study. Jin-Gitaxi's Progress Tyrant, whenever we cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, copy that spell. You may choose a new target for the copy. This ability triggers only once each turn. Or whenever an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery, counter that spell. This ability triggers only once each turn. This is a great way to copy our copy spells and get double the value. Creating 2 versions of our commander or even Jin-Gitaxis is super great. If we can make multiple versions of Jin-Gitaxis as well, we're going to get multiple triggers of that first spell you cast each turn to create even more copies, which seems really powerful. Reanimate is one of the best reanimation cards. Whenever you put a target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and you lose life equal to its converted mana cost. There's not a lot of creatures that are super expensive in this deck, so that seems pretty well worth it. And Rhystic Study has, whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless they pay 1. This is one of the best blue draw spells, and it's quite expensive, so I can understand if you don't want to put it in. But it is also getting reprinted in the Wilds of Eldraine, so this is a very cool card, and I hope you get one. And lastly, we have Sleight of Hand and Swan Song. Sleight of Hand is a new card. We look at the top 2 cards of our library, put one of them into our hand, the other on the bottom of our library. It's a pretty cool card. For 1 blue, and it's a sorcery. This might be fun to play. And Swan Song, one of the coolest counter spells because we counter target enchantment, instant, or sorcery. Its controller creates a 2/2 bird creature token with flying. And that is it. Thank you so much for watching. This is a really cool commander. You know, I think I built this deck pretty well. I spent a lot of time trying to think of how do I actually do this because it's so unique. You know, we've never really seen anything like this before, so I hope you enjoy and maybe you'll give this deck a try. There's a lot of other great copier spells in Magic, you know, where if you can find other ways to make the legend rule don't apply, you know, please leave the comments down below. I would love to know how. And if you like this video, please leave a like. It would really help me out. And today's Scryfall card of the day is Chain Whip Cyclops. You say this 10th district, not Rumblebelt, but where Smash happened? That Rumblebelt. Rumblebelt State of Mind. Urgdar Cyclops Philosopher. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.